Be proud of your failures. That shows you tried. Jesus told the story about a man who didn't try. He said he had been given a talent with the instruction that he was to use that talent and be accountable for what he had done with it. But the man was afraid, and he took the talent and wrapped it up in a napkin and put it carefully away. Time passed. The master returned, asked for the man to give an account of what he had done with the talent that had been entrusted to him. And the man answered, I was afraid. I was afraid I would fail. And so I took the napkin and I put it carefully away so that I could return it to you. Jesus said that the master became quite angry with the one to whom the talent had been entrusted, not because he had failed, but because he had not tried. And so the words that he spoke in condemnation of his behavior were very harsh. The easiest way to avoid failure is to not try. I have a nephew who is quite successful. He played both basketball and football when he was in high school and was named All-City at the time of his graduation. Was given an athletic scholarship to one of the state universities. While he was playing, he suffered an injury to his knee and had to give up the sport altogether. And having lost his scholarship in athletics, he transferred to a small liberal arts college. And there he began studying for a career in law. He did well, graduating at the top of his class. But during the course of those years when he strove so hard, times were difficult, financial pressures. He had gotten married just before he went away to college, and so as he received his baccalaureate degree, he did so with his wife's failing health. She went to a doctor and he instructed her that the pressure was too great, saying that her husband would have to drop out of school for a while and give his attention altogether to her. He could return to law school later. And so he returned to his home city of Cleveland, Ohio. There he got a job as a teller in a bank. This was not the field for which he had dreamed or prepared, but it was the place where he found himself. He worked diligently. By the age of 27, he was vice president. That same year, he was named one of the 10 outstanding young men of the city of Cleveland, Ohio. And shortly after that, he was lured away to become the president of a multi-million-dollar holding company. His dream was in teaching if he couldn't practice law. And so he gave up that lucrative position and went to Western Reserve University as dean of one of the schools of business administration. From there, he began to branch out as one of the leading consultants of the city, being consulted to many major corporations. And he's still on the light side of 50. A few years ago, my sister died, his mother. I flew to Cleveland to be with her a few days before her death. That evening, before I left to come home, her son, my nephew, came and spent the evening, and the two of us sat beside her bed just talking. We excused ourselves, but she wouldn't let us leave. She said, I can't think of anything I'd rather do than just sit and listen to my two favorite people talk. And talk we did. We talked about dreams and achievements, those unresolved aims and goals. Finally, he said, "Vance, have you ever thought about writing?" I admitted that I had been encouraged to become a professional writer when I was in college, and that ever since then there had been people who encouraged me to write for publication, but I'd always resisted it. He said, "I came upon some of your writings and I felt like you ought to be a writer, and there's still time for you to do it." I demurred, "I won't write because I won't run the risk of rejection." We talked about that, taking risks, and then the evening was over. I came home. A week hadn't passed until I got a note in the mail. It was for my nephew, and the message was terse. Simply this: "Vance, to not write might be the greater risk." That was 15 years ago, and I still haven't written because I will not take the risk of rejection. Perhaps one of my best gifts has gone unused. Perhaps there would have been a wider range of influence if I had entered into that field of communication. I didn't because I didn't want the risk of failure. How often we deny ourselves opportunities and privileges simply because we're afraid to take the risk. We can live a life totally free of failure, and the only thing we need to do is to not take a risk, and we'll be assured that we never fail. It's what the young man did who had been given the talent. Nothing came of it because he was afraid he might fail. But many times we fail because we don't set our goals high enough. Everything that we attempt to do is already within our reach. We don't run any risks. It's easy to accomplish. And any person about whom it is said he never failed at anything he attempted, you can be sure he didn't attempt many great things. He lived a small life. We can't always accomplish what we set out to do, but it is of vital importance that we set out to do things that are beyond our reach, that threatens us with the possibility of failure. We as individuals so often live dwarfed lives because we won't take the risk. But more seriously, we as the church so often are dwarfed because we are unwilling to take risks, to expand our vision, to reach beyond our grasp. When you look at the churches of our conference, some have risen to places of greatness and some have remained plodders, and you can easily see what is the cause of the one's success and the reason for the other's lack of success. It's vision among the people. Hear this. Any church, no matter how small, can become a great church. All it needs to do is lift its vision to high plateaus and to be willing to go the extra mile in order to accomplish it. It used to amuse me when I lived in Gatlinburg to go to the ski resort and see skiers come in with expensive equipment. They've paid a small fortune just to walk out onto the slopes with all the right equipment, but they never go out on the slopes. They dress up for it and never do it. Their joy is just being there in the aura of skiing, sitting by the fire, drinking and enjoying the company of other people, and then taking off their expensive finery and going back to their jobs. Anyone can achieve greatness. Within his limitations, he can become great by being willing to take risks and to try just a little bit harder. It's been impressive to me to see that the power that is carried on the shoulders with greater solidity is the power that is borne by the average persons and not by those who have the public image and the spotlight. Someone said to Roy L. Smith, "Who do you consider the greatest Christian who ever lived?" And Roy Smith said, "I don't know, and neither do you. The greatest Christian who ever lived is someone out there who is doing the thing that he can do to the best of his ability and more. And he may be hidden in a place where no one sees him." It isn't to be applauded by our peers. It is to be rewarded by God that makes it important. Failures can become stepping stones. An untried life will never really master itself. We are always living in confinements when we never allow ourselves to fail and get up again with a lesson learned. Let me tell you about a man. Just out of his teens, he got his first job clerking in a store. He worked hard, diligently, but the store failed and he lost his job. He failed at the first job that he tried to do by the business having failed, and he had to start all over again. His country was at war, and so being patriotic, wanting to fight for his country, he enlisted in the army. He never saw battle. He was always in the back lines. He wanted to fight. He wanted to do something positively, but his life had come to a stalemate. He was just simply marking off time until his time in the service was over, and he came back home. He had some savings from the time that he was in the army, very little else. He bought interest in a store that was being operated by someone else, and unknown to him was on the brink of bankruptcy at the time that he became a partner. He invested everything that he had in the store, and he worked hard, but no matter how hard he worked, the store went further and further into the red. And then his partner died, and he discovered that his partner had debts that he didn't even know of that had been attributed to the corporate name of the store. And he was liable for them personally as a full partner. And so the store went under, and he labored hard to pay off all the debts, to honor himself and his partner, but he failed in his business. He thought he would make a good politician, and so he ran for the state legislature. And he was defeated. He began to study law, getting more and more interest in politics. After a while, he ran for the nomination of his party for Congress, but he lost. He made many friends, so he tried it again the next go-round. He ran again for the nomination of his party, and again he lost. But he did practice law and made a lot of friends in his community. There was a choice appointment to be made in government service. He applied for it, and he was denied it. He decided he would try his hand at politics again. This time he ran for the Senate, escalating it every time, being defeated for the state legislature, being defeated for the nomination for Congress, and now he ran for the Senate, and predictably he was defeated again. And now he was 50 years old, but he tried his hand one more time. He ran for the presidency, and he was elected. And Abraham Lincoln became the greatest president that America has ever known. One of the greatest men in the world, with a vision unparalleled as to what a country built on the principles of democracy and freedom could be. I read a part of his biography by Carl Sandburg just recently. It impressed me how the North was ready to quit but that Lincoln kept their feet to the fire because he said, "This Union divided will fall." We would be two countries today, each one at a level of mediocrity, except for the vision of a loser, a man whose life was marked by losing, but when his moment came, showed his greatness. Failures can be stepping stones, and no true success comes without the lessons learned from having failed. But we must never become acclimated to failure. We must never accept failure as our lot. A high school senior made application for college. He received a letter which rejected his application. He was not to be admitted to that college. And he sat down and he wrote a letter. "Dear admissions officer, I received your letter rejecting my application for college. I want you to know I reject your rejection of me. I've already been rejected by 4 other colleges, and I'm not willing to accept that many rejections. So I reject your rejection, and I will appear for classes on September the 25th. Well, I don't know if they admitted him or not, but that's the kind of spirit we've got to take into our failures. Refuse to accept failure. Around the turn of the century, a young fella in his 20s submitted a sheaf of poems to the Atlantic Monthly, and after a few months he received them back with a rejection slip stating these poems are not of the quality of our magazine. His name was Robert Frost. And it was about that same time at the University of Bern when a graduate student was submitting his dissertation for his PhD, and his faculty advisors turned it down, would not accept it, and on it they wrote, "This dissertation lacks reality. It is unrealistic for our times." And the writer of that dissertation later developed the theory of relativity, one of the greatest minds ever produced in the realm of science. And during that same time, there was a young student in England who had taken a course in rhetoric. At the end of the term, his professor had written on his report, "You will never be a speaker. You don't have what it takes." And the voice of that man gave encouragement to the minds of the people of England during World War II, lifted them up when they had nothing else to encourage them. Winston Churchill rose to the occasion years after he was told he would never be a speaker. And it goes on, the list goes on and on of those who rose up out of the world's depiction of failure only to become great leaders and great minds. Martin Luther, who failed to be the leader of his church in reforming it, but became the catalyst of a great Protestant tradition. And John Wesley, who failed as a missionary to America, but went back home to start all over again with new insights and become the progenitor of the great 18th century revival, which has had a greater impact upon England possibly than any other particular individual. And we are his children. And David Livingstone, who went into darkest Africa, became lost to the world and gained one convert to Jesus Christ. It isn't that we must not fail. The greater sin is not to try. God has put talents in each of our hands and each of our hearts. And the ultimate judgment is not how successful were you, But how hard did you try? And now this. There's no limit to what you can do with your life spiritually. There may be some limits to what you can do in the world of the intelligentsia. There may be a limitation to what you can do in the realm of science. There may be a limit to what you can do in skilled labors, but there is no limit to what you can accomplish spiritually. Our problem is we don't try. Our problem is we don't reach far enough. But the person we become ultimately depends upon that above all else. It's yours. Go take it. Amen.